When a controlling HOA, Karen tried to destroy a peaceful farmer's livelihood by calling the cops. She never expected the entire town and the law to turn against her. What happened next was the kind of karma you dream about. Sunlight streamed across rows of vibrant crops swaying in the morning breeze. The land had been cultivated for years, carefully nurtured by steady hands that respected the soil. Chickens clucked contentedly near a rustic wooden coop, while bees buzzed lazily among wildflowers planted along the fence line. Each corner of the property held evidence of patient, purposeful work: compost piles neatly arranged, water barrels catching rain, and hand-carved signs warning visitors to close the gate behind them. The farmer, known to neighbors simply as Mr. Hale, had lived on the land long before the surrounding fields became a suburban sprawl. Once isolated and quiet, the rural plots began to disappear as developers swept in, building tidy cul-de-sacs and pristine sidewalks. But the farm remained, not out of stubbornness, but out of commitment. It wasn't just land, it was legacy. The newcomers admired the charm at first. Children pointed in awe at goats nibbling weeds by the fence, while joggers occasionally paused to take pictures of the sunflowers towering near the road. But admiration soured for some, as property values soared and homeowners gathered under the watchful eye of the HOA. Concerns were raised, not by many, just one in particular. Karen Whitmore, president of the local homeowners association, viewed the farm as a blemish on her well-manicured domain. With her clipboard in one hand and smartphone in the other, she took inventory of every blade of grass out of place in the community. And to her, the farm was a messin, uncontrolled, unapproved disruption to suburban perfection. She began her campaign quietly. A letter slipped into Mr. Hale's mailbox, stamped with the HOA logo, expressing concerns about odor, noise, and non-compliance with community appearance standards. It was worded formally, but the tone reeked of superiority. Mr. Hale read it once, folded it neatly, and slid it into a drawer, beside dozens of thank you notes from neighbors who'd once enjoyed free pumpkins in the fall. Karen didn't stop there. She started monitoring the property during her morning walks. Every time a rooster crowed, she noted the time. When she spotted manure being spread on the back field, she snapped photos with her phone. Chickens crossing the driveway, farm tools left by the fence. Even a scarecrow made from old clothes each became part of her growing evidence. File neighbors who passed her during these walks received icy smiles and brief nods. Some whispered that she'd become obsessed. Others dismissed it as typical HOA behavior. But beneath the surface, tension began to simmer. Karen's second letter was more aggressive. This time, she listed multiple violations, referencing rules about landscaping, nuisance noise, and even property boundary decorum. She demanded compliance within 10 business days. Again, Mr. Hale read the letter.com and measured, but didn't respond. The farm was outside the HOA's jurisdiction, grandfathered in before the bylaws existed. The house may have looked like it sat in the neighborhood, but legally, it stood apart. That fact didn't sit well with Karen. She called an emergency HOA meeting. Only a handful of residents showed up, and most expressed mild annoyance at the drama. One elderly woman defended the farmer, citing how he'd offered eggs and vegetables to anyone who asked. Another neighbor reminded Karen that the land helped keep taxes lower by qualifying for agricultural exemptions. But Karen pushed on. She framed it as a matter of principle, warning that the unsightly conditions could lead to drops in home value. Her voice grew sharp, her words calculated. But not everyone was convinced. That week, Karen began visiting the county website. She pored through zoning documents, tax maps, and legal notices. Still, she couldn't find anything that would give her power over the farm. Frustration mounted. Her next step was to escalate the situation further. She began recording noises from the property at odd hours, emailing them to the HOA's general inbox. In one clip, a goat bleated twice.
Ow.
In another, a tractor's engine rumbled for a few seconds. She labeled them audio disturbances. She even complained that birds nesting in the barn attracted too many crows to the neighborhood by now. Word had spread. People began stopping by the farm to ask what was going on. Mr. Hale, patient as always, simply smiled and said he was doing what he'd always done. A few offered support, even bringing pies and fresh coffee to show solidarity. Others kept their distance, not wanting to get involved, but Karen wasn't slowing down. She took new photos, zoomed in on muddy boots outside the shed, a rusted mailbox, a broken wheelbarrow leaning against a tree. She posted them anonymously in the HOA Facebook group with captions like, "Is this what we want in our community?" or "Eyesore next to my backyard, time to take action." She kept her phone ready at all times, waiting for the moment she could catch the farmer breaking a rule that mattered. And soon she would dial a number she believed would finally give her the upper hand. But the land wasn't done standing its ground, and neither was the man who worked it. Karen stood at the edge of her perfectly trimmed lawn, arms crossed, watching the farmer's property like a hawk. The usual morning breeze carried the earthy scent of fresh soil and livestock, and to her, that scent was war paint. With her phone already recording, she zoomed in on a chicken pecking at the gravel near the fence. She titled the video "Livestock Roaming Near Public Property" and saved it to a folder labeled "Hail Violations." The next day, she walked her property line again, wearing dark sunglasses and clutching a notepad. She scribbled down supposed code infractions, timing how long the rooster crowed, counting how many buckets sat outside the barn, and writing down the make and model of every truck parked on the dirt driveway. Her complaints grew more specific with every step: proper containment of livestock, unapproved commercial activity, and unauthorized agricultural odors. Karen contacted the HOA legal advisor and asked for options to remove non-compliant agricultural elements from the vicinity. The lawyer explained again that the farmer's property predated the HOA's establishment and was zoned for agricultural use. Frustrated but undeterred, she redirected her strategy toward outside authorities. She began filing formal complaints with the local zoning board, public health department, and even animal control. Each report listed vague but inflammatory claims: insanitary conditions, uncontrolled animal waste, and unlicensed farming. She submitted these under her name, her authority as HOA president clearly noted. But as each agency visited and left without consequence, Karen only grew more determined. The farm remained peaceful and unchanged. The animals were healthy, the equipment well kept, and nothing violated any zoning ordinances. Every inspection ended the same way: no action needed. Karen started calling the officials herself, pushing for in-person meetings and demanding follow-ups. Most politely refused. One inspector even warned her that false reports could result in fines. She ignored the warning. Karen turned to digital tactics next. She posted pictures of the farm's compost piles on neighborhood message boards and claimed they were health hazards. She circulated a survey suggesting the farm's presence was lowering home values, though no actual data supported it. She tried to rally a group of residents to sign a petition to remove the farm, but barely anyone did. A few residents who once tolerated Karen's meticulous oversight began asking questions. One homeowner asked why she seemed obsessed with the farmer. Another pointed out that the farm had been there long before anyone else had moved in. Some neighbors began removing themselves from the HOA Facebook group, tired of the constant farm-related complaints. Karen doubled down. She attended a county board meeting and took the floor during the public comment session. Her voice rose as she described farm animals running wild, tractor noises interrupting daily life, and debris polluting the environment. The council members listened respectfully, then clarified again that the farm was legal and compliant. One board member even publicly thanked Mr. Hale for maintaining a clean and productive agricultural space, defeated yet again. Karen returned home and began preparing her final escalation, contacting law enforcement. She collected audio clips from her phone, photographs of supposed violations, and typed up a multi-page complaint. In it, she accused the farmer of violating noise ordinances, environmental codes, and operating an unlicensed business. She labeled it a public nuisance and claimed that residents feared for their safety. She submitted the file to the sheriff's office and waited. A few days later, 2 uniformed deputies arrived at the farmer's gate. Karen watched from across the street, her eyes fixed on the patrol car, phone already in hand to record the encounter. She zoomed in on the deputies' badges and lips, hoping to catch every word. When the farmer calmly stepped outside to greet them, Karen leaned forward, heart pounding, certain she was witnessing his downfall, but the conversation remained calm. The farmer offered the officers a tour, showed them his permits, zoning documents, and inspection results. The deputies nodded, took notes, eventually shook his hand before leaving without issuing a single citation. Karen couldn't believe it. She replayed the video over and over, trying to find something she could use. Nothing. She angrily uploaded a clip to the neighborhood Facebook group with the caption, "Farm still not shut down due. We need to act ourselves," instead of support. The post received backlash. Neighbors defended the farmer, calling Karen's behavior obsessive and inappropriate. One neighbor reminded her of the false accusations, the wasted county resources, and the harassment. A second warned that continuing to file false reports could lead to legal consequences. Karen deleted the post, but saved every comment, still unwilling to let go. She scheduled another emergency HOA meeting. This time, fewer people showed up. Those who did, several questioned whether the HOA was still operating in the community's best interest. Someone even suggested that Karen step down from her position if she couldn't focus on real neighborhood concerns. Karen left the meeting early, furious. She had built her reputation on order, control, and enforcement. She believed the farm challenged all of that. But now, cracks were forming around her authority, and the community was beginning to see it. Her crusade had officially backfired, but she wasn't ready to admit defeat. She still believed she could win and tell karma. Decided it was time for the tables to turn. Word of Karen's campaign against the farmer spread through the neighborhood faster than she expected. At first it began with whispers conversations between dog walkers, passing remarks during school pickups, and quiet exchanges between neighbors. Tending their lawns, people started connecting the dots. The sudden HOA emails about unapproved agricultural activity, the increase in county vehicles near the farm, the unusually frequent HOA meetings, residents who had lived in the area, long before the HOA's formation, remembered how welcoming the farmer had always been. He helped shovel snow from neighbors' driveways, donated extra vegetables during summer harvest, and offered tours of his property to curious children. His actions had always spoken louder than words, and now those memories stirred a quiet loyalty in the hearts of his neighbors. A group of residents came together to draft a letter of support, titled, "We Stand with Our Farmer." They cited his positive contributions to the community, highlighted his legal right to operate on grandfathered agricultural zoning, and denounced the recent harassment. Dozens of signatures followed within days. The letter circulated across mailboxes, inboxes, and even the HOA forum where Karen once dominated every thread. Some neighbors began posting their own stories. A mother wrote about how her daughter had learned more about nature from the farm than in any classroom. A retiree shared how the farmer had once fixed his fence free of charge. One man described how the farm provided fresh eggs during the pandemic. When grocery shelves were empty, every post painted a picture of a man who gave far more than he took. Local support grew into public resistance. Yard signs appeared across driveways. "We support our farmer, farms feed communities, and HOA shouldn't bully our neighbors." These signs sparked conversations, sometimes heated. But they made one thing clear: Karen no longer spoke for the entire community. Behind closed doors, more residents began investigating the HOA's actions. Meeting minutes were reviewed, spending, reports analyzed, and leadership decisions questioned. Inconsistencies began to surface. The HOA had funneled significant legal consultation fees toward land use enforcement, all targeting the farm. When asked at the next meeting to justify these expenses, Karen stumbled. Her usual composure cracked under pressure. Her vague responses left residents more suspicious than ever. A small committee of homeowners, previously uninvolved in HOA affairs, requested access to all formal complaints filed against the farm. The request was legal, and Karen had no choice but to comply. When the documents were shared, residents were stunned. Dozens of complaints had come solely from Karen. No other residents had filed any formal grievances, not even once. The paper trail revealed an obvious vendetta disguised as policy enforcement. Legal experts in the community began weighing in. One neighbor, a retired paralegal, pointed out that repeated false reports to authorities could constitute harassment. Another, a law student, compiled a list of potential violations of HOA procedural integrity, including lack of transparency, misuse of community funds, and abuse of power. Calls for Karen's resignation began to circulate. Some came quietly, through private messages and side conversations. Others were posted directly in the HOA group chat. Leadership should reflect community values, one message read. Another stated bluntly, "You're not protecting the neighborhood, you're targeting a neighbor." Karen responded with a defensive post claiming the farm posed safety concerns. No one engaged. The silence was louder than argument. She followed up with a poll asking if residents supported stricter enforcement of HOA guidelines. The result was a landslide. 91% voted no. The county, receiving a wave of support letters for the farm, issued a public statement confirming the property's compliance with all regulations. The announcement was posted in the local news and shared widely online. The farmer's name became associated with resilience and fairness, while Karen's became linked to pettiness and overreach. A neighborhood potluck, organized by residents, was hosted on the cul-de-sac closest to the farm. Dozens attended, many bringing dishes made from farm-fresh ingredients. Laughter, music, and conversations filled the air. It was a quiet act of unity, but also a visible rejection of Karen's tactics. She received an invitation but never showed. The HOA board, sensing the shift, scheduled a special meeting to address community concerns. Residents packed the venue. Voices rose in support of change. Several called for a vote to remove Karen from her position. Others proposed rewriting portions of the HOA bylaws to limit executive authority and require community votes for future enforcement actions. The meeting concluded with a motion to initiate a leadership review and freeze any further HOA actions against the farm. The motion passed unanimously. Karen's silence after the meeting was deafening. Momentum had changed hands. The community that once quietly tolerated the HOA's overreach had found its voice. It rallied not just behind the farmer, but against the abuse of power disguised as policy. Unity had replaced fear, and integrity had silenced control. Karen had launched a campaign expecting compliance. Instead, she ignited a movement. And the people she thought would follow her had chosen to stand instead with the land, with their neighbor, and with each other. The shift from frustration to accountability began with the arrival of a certified letter addressed to Karen from the county compliance office. It detailed the results of multiple investigations prompted by her complaints and noted the absence of any code violations. Instead, the letter included a formal warning for misuse of county resources and filing knowingly false or exaggerated reports. A citation followed shortly after, citing her for obstruction of public duties and wasting official time. Her signature attached to every complaint became her undoing. The HOA board received a copy of the citation. Board members who had once silently backed her out of convenience now expressed concern about liability. One member submitted a motion for a formal audit of the HOA's enforcement actions during Karen's presidency. The audit exposed the lopsided nature of the HOA's recent activities. Dozens of hours logged on complaints against one property, nearly all originating from a single individual. In response, the board issued a temporary suspension of Karen's authority, pending review. Without official power, her influence crumbled quickly. Emails she sent went unanswered, proposed agenda items were dismissed, and residents stopped acknowledging her status. Her once loyal circle of enforcers quietly distanced themselves. Unwilling to share in the fallout, the county issued a public correction through the local news station, confirming the farmer's full legal compliance and publicly acknowledging the undue harassment he endured. The statement, widely shared online, garnered supportive comments from across the region. Several nearby towns even praised the farmer as a model for sustainable agriculture and community integrity. Karen's reputation, once rooted in discipline and control, now centered around entitlement and abuse. The Facebook group she once moderated turned against her. Posts criticized her tactics, memes mocked her obsession, and screenshots of her exaggerated reports were shared with disbelief and ridicule. She attempted to remove posts and restrict comments, but was soon removed as an administrator. The farmer, meanwhile, received unexpected visitors from the zoning office, not to penalize him, but to inform him that his property had been nominated for a heritage preservation status. The land's continuous operation, ecological maintenance, and historical roots qualified it for protection. The designation, if approved, would make it nearly immune to interference from residential ordinances. The process moved swiftly, fast-tracked. In part by overwhelming public support, an invitation arrived from the local school district, requesting a formal partnership with the farm to support agricultural education. The district proposed field trips, volunteer programs, and a student-led community garden supported by the farmer's expertise. The offer reflected the community's commitment to preserving the values Karen had tried to erase. A regional journalist featured the story in a Sunday editorial. The piece chronicled the farmer's legacy, the hostile campaign waged against him, and the community's unified pushback. The headline read, "One farm, one town, and one woman's misguided war," had become synonymous with public embarrassment. Legal professionals contacted by the HOA began advising that Karen's actions may have exposed the association to lawsuits. Several board members resigned quietly to avoid further association with the controversy. A new election was scheduled, and new leadership was ushered in, members who promised transparency, fairness, and the prevention of any future abuse of power. The newly elected HOA president issued an open apology to the farmer, acknowledging the organization's failure to act impartially. The board committed to revising enforcement policies, mandating board votes before any formal complaint could be pursued, and eliminating unilateral action by a single officer. Karen, still clinging to fragments of her former authority, attempted to challenge the decision. She submitted a motion claiming the board acted out of personal bias. The motion was dismissed without consideration. Her remaining credibility vanished when a cease and desist letter arrived from the farmer's attorney, citing harassment, defamation, and abuse of process. Faced with mounting legal pressure, public humiliation, and total loss of power, Karen finally stepped down from the HOA. Her resignation letter, posted to the HOA forum, attempted to frame her departure as a selfless act to restore unity. No comments were left under the post, no likes, no reactions. Shortly after her resignation, a for sale sign appeared in her yard. Her house, once the model of suburban order, sat unsold for weeks as buyers hesitated over a name now tied to conflict and controversy. Whispered conversations during open houses included phrases like the one who went after the farmer and the lady from the news. Meanwhile, the farm saw a surge in visitors. Families stopped by to buy produce. Children laughed as they fed chickens. Volunteers helped with weeding and fence repairs. The land thrived with renewed purpose, its roots deeper than ever, not just in soil, but in the hearts of those who had defended it. The power that had once been wielded to intimidate had been dismantled. The system that failed to protect one man had been reformed by the very people it claimed to represent. Justice came not with noise, but with quiet, steady actions, petitions, meetings, conversations. Votes. Karma had taken its course not through revenge, but through accountability. And the tables, once tilted in favor of authority, had been turned by truth, unity, and a community that finally chose to stand together. The community settled into a new rhythm, one shaped by empathy rather than enforcement. With new leadership in the HOA, trust began to rebuild. Residents who had once been hesitant to speak now found their voices, participating in meetings, offering feedback, and suggesting projects to enhance the neighborhood. The culture shifted from compliance to collaboration. The farm, once seen by a few as an eyesore, had become a symbol of pride. Families now made weekend trips to buy fresh produce and homemade jams. Students volunteered for community service, hours, learning firsthand about sustainability, soil care, and animal husbandry. Local chefs began sourcing ingredients directly from the land, featuring seasonal dishes with the farmer's name on their menus. The very place that had drawn scrutiny had become a celebrated cornerstone of local identity. An annual event was born out of the Transformation Farm Day. The event featured live music, guided tours, workshops, and food stands. Local businesses sponsored activities, and the proceeds supported school garden programs and low-income families. The turnout for the first farm day exceeded every expectation. Neighbors mingled with visitors from other towns, children ran free with painted faces, and stories of the farm's legacy were shared with admiration. News of the festival reached regional outlets. One publication ran a follow-up article titled "From Target to Treasure, the Farm That Won Over a Town." The story celebrated not only the farmer's quiet strength, but also the community's choice to reject overreach and choose fairness. The farmer was presented with a community award at the event, engraved with a simple phrase, "For planting more than seeds." Meanwhile, Karen's departure faded into the background, replaced by new energy and progress. Her home eventually sold, but only after a price reduction and long negotiation. The new homeowners, unaware of the drama, were greeted warmly by the community. They were welcomed with baskets of fresh produce, handwritten notes, and offers to help settle in. The contrast was striking. Where once there had been tension, there was now warmth. A local university invited the farmer to speak to its agriculture students. His story served as a case study, not in farming alone, but in resilience and community relations. He spoke about regulation, public trust, and how working with neighbors could be more effective than fighting them. His words carried weight not because they were loud, but because they were lived. Legal reforms followed quietly. The HOA revised its charter to include limits on unilateral authority, mandatory community votes for enforcement actions, and protections for long-standing properties. These changes ensured that no single voice could dominate the association again. Transparency became the new standard, and Karen's model of leadership was shelved permanently. Among neighbors, informal networks of support formed, gardening clubs, tool exchanges, and cooperative cleanup crews emerged, many of which partnered with the farm. People who had once stayed behind their fences began to collaborate on shared goals. The barriers that once defined property lines started to blur, replaced by mutual respect. A mural appeared on a community wall near the local park. It depicted a lush green field, a rising sun, and hands holding seedlings. Words beside it read, "We grow stronger together." It became a favorite backdrop for family photos, graduation pictures, and community event flyers. The HOA now recognized the farm as a protected cultural and environmental asset. It appeared on maps, directories, and official communications. The property that had once been targeted for removal was now a permanent fixture, woven into the identity of the neighborhood itself. Tourists occasionally visited the town, drawn by the viral headlines and local charm. They left with baskets of produce and stories of how one farmer stood his ground and how his neighbors stood beside him. Local businesses flourished from the renewed attention, and civic pride surged. Sweet karma had arrived not as punishment, but as restoration. The farmer regained his peace. The community reclaimed its values. And the damage done by one person's obsession was healed by the collective strength of many. The final act of irony came when the former HOA president's name was quietly removed from official records. Her tenure was acknowledged in past meeting notes, but no commemorative plaque, no tribute, and no memory remained in public spaces. She had tried to control the story and lost. The story was never hers to write. It belonged to those who chose. Fairness over fear, growth over control, and neighbors over nuisance. Justice, in the end, was quiet and patient. It came in sunlit mornings, shared meals, laughter between fences, and children learning how to tend a garden. It came in dignity restored and rights protected. It came without vengeance, only with truth. The land kept thriving. The farmer kept farming. The town kept growing. And karma, having served its purpose, moved on, leaving behind a community stronger, wiser, and united.